it's time to kick it up another notch. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use a technique to sharpen just the luminosity, or just the gray part of the image. And we're going to blur back the color a little bit so that we get a much smoother sharpening effect. And we can use this not by itself, but you use this in conjunction with unsharp masking or smart sharpening. So let's get started. What I'm going to do here first is let's take a look at it on our flower. We're going to look at it on a couple of different images here. Let's take this image and bring it up to 100%. And now let's expand that just a little bit. Okay. Now remember, when we did our unsharp masking, and we're going to use this with unsharp mask here, we go to Sharpen and we go to unsharp mask. But before we do that, we duplicate our layer. And we're going to call this layer Sharpen. Okay. Now let's go in, go to our filter, go to unsharp mask, and here we see our sharpening. We've got about 134% in here. That's a little drastic, so let's bring it down a little bit, maybe bring the radius down just a touch. Okay, this looks fine. All right, so now I say OK. Now before I do anything else, before I touch anything, I go up to the Edit menu and I go back and I see something here that says Fade Unsharp Mask. Now what happens with Photoshop is whenever you take a lot of different actions, mostly in the filters, but some other things also, the next step you can take is to fade the previous action. So what we're going to do now is we're going to fade our unsharp mask. And the way we do that is we just click this and we get a little dialog box. Now, let's take a little closer look at the dialog box here. And we can see that we have a couple of things we can do. We can fade the opacity. We can also change our blending mode. And that's what we're going to do here. So let's zoom this back down. And we're going to change our blending mode, because what we did was sharpness. We're going to take that just to affect luminosity. It's not going to affect the color. It's just going to affect the gray part of the image. So now that we have that, we can go in and we can actually fine-tune our sharpening a little bit if we wanted to, and bring it back a little bit. But I think for right now I'm going to leave this at 100%, and we're just going to fade or change our blending mode for the sharpening to luminosity. So we say OK. Now just to see what the effect of that was, we can go back and we see, yes, even though we did fade luminosity, we did, or change our blending mode to luminosity, we did sharpen the image. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to blur our colors a little bit. We're going to blur the image, and then we're going to go back up to the fade function, and we're going to limit that to the colors only, and we're not going to affect the luminosity on that. And what that will do is give us a little smoother image. So now let's go up to the filter menu, and I'm just going to use a Gaussian blur here. So we go to Blur, Gaussian Blur, and we don't need to blur it a lot. You don't want to go out and do something like this. What we want to do is go down to maybe 1 pixel. Okay, and you can see that the 1 pixel gives us just a little bit of blur. There's our sharpened image. Here's the blurred image. We're going to say OK. Now we go up to the Edit menu, and look at our fade function now says Fade Gaussian Blur. It doesn't say Fade Sharpening anymore. And now I'm going to go in to the same dialog box, and I'm going to change the mode here to color. And look, the sharpening just snaps right back in. And I can fade my blur a little bit to see if that's going to have an effect. Well, not a lot, but a little bit of an effect. So now we say OK, and here's our sharpened image, We've used the unsharp masking function, but we've kicked it up a notch. We've limited our sharpening to the luminosity, and we have blurred out the color just to make it a little smoother. Here's the non-sharpened image, and here's the sharpened image. Now, let's take a look at that on a different image to see what kind of effect that may have. I'm just going to close this image. I'm not going to save it. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to go to our blimp. So let's open up the blimp image. And in the detail, I'm just going to use our nominal settings here. So let's just open the image. We're going to bring it up to 100% as soon as it's opened. Okay, and let me expand this so we can see a little more of the image. All right, there we are. Now I'm going to go in. First thing I'm going to do is create a new layer. I can name that layer Sharpen. And now I'm going to go up and I'm going to go to my filter. I'm going to go to my Sharpen, and I'm going to use my unsharp mask. I'm going to come in here and I can see that, well, this is about 110%. Let's take it up a little bit more here, because you can see here, let's bring this over a little bit, that I'm beginning to get a little bit of lightening in my colored areas next to my blacks. Because remember, what the sharpening does is it increases the contrast around edges. You can see that even more in the yellow. There seems to be a little band around here. So let's see if this method will get rid of some of that. So I'm going to use my radius here. I've got 1.3 pixels on the radius, and I've got my amount set to about 127%, and I'm just going to say OK. Now I'm going to go up to my Edit menu, and you can see that Unsharp Mask is ready for me to fade. And I come in and I'm changing the sharpness. I'm fading my sharpness, and I'm changing the mode to Luminosity. And let's see if there's going to be a big difference here. Well, I don't see a big difference. Okay, that's good. And now I'm going to go in and I'm going to blur my colors. We go to blur, we go to Gaussian blur, and again we're already set at 1% here, and you can see that I've got my blur in, and now I'm going to go back up to the Edit menu immediately to fade Gaussian blur, and I'm going to put the mode there into color. And you can see that before and after, and there's my sharpness again, and I can change back my opacity just a little bit if I'd like. And here's my image. It's been sharpened, and we'll take it down to a 50% here, and you can see that the image is sharpened. Let's turn the sharpening off, and it looks very, very nice. It looks a lot nicer than if I had just used the straight unsharp mask. And that's all there is to this method. Now remember, you use this in conjunction with the other sharpening methods. So you pick and choose what you want to do depending on the image that you have. And sometimes you have to try different things on a single image, because one technique will work better on some images than it will on others.